104.7 The Cave, Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens in the studio. This is Dark Side of the Stream, episode 177 of the documentary that I picked while Jay fixes his phone.
You would think we'd have an awesome intro music by now, episode 190.
We don't have time for that because we spent all our time watching documentaries.
Right.
So you don't have to. This week for our 177th episode was mine. It is called American Conspiracy, The Octopus Murders. You can watch it on Netflix. And this one was near and dear to my heart because I was very familiar of this story because it had been featured several times in Unsolved Mysteries, the classic series with Robert Stack. And it involved the death of a journalist, Danny Casolaro, who had been investigating what he called the octopus. And before we get into that, I do want to apologize to Jay for making you watch a very convoluted and long documentary.
This was two weeks in a row. We watched long documentaries.
Dude, it was so
had
long.
A lot going on.
So long. Yeah. I almost fell asleep like 3 times. And I was interested in it. And I mean, out of the gate, I knew, like, I could just see it I could just see you sitting there going, what?
Yeah,
what? And all this stuff flying overhead. Now, there are so many things to this story.
A lot of parts.
There's a lot of pieces because it starts off with the death of this journalist, and then you start to figure out what he was investigating, the people he knew. And as you go into it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. Bottom line.
And another person investigating something that committed suicide, which this happens. It just happened a week ago. Why do I have balloons?
Dude, I didn't do that.
Did you see that?
I don't know.
How did I just get balloons?
I have no idea how you did that. I don't know how that happened.
The government. But yeah, it just happened a week ago with Boeing, a whistleblower for Boeing. He committed suicide the day after his testimony. Come on. These guys ain't committed suicide. Jeffrey Epstein, they ain't committed suicide.
In regards to Danny, if you look at the crime scene photos and his wrists, like those aren't cuts. Those are gashes, man.
Dude.
Like,
I don't know why these people
gashes.
say
they're not like
suicide.
Like they're not slices. Like there are little
multiple
chunks of his wrists that are gone.
Yeah.
And I think he was 20 cuts, something like that, which is insane.
Come on.
We'll get to the suspect and all that stuff down the line, but there's a lot of stuff we got to build in the foundation here. And that starts off with the fact that this guy was investigating Inslaw. And Inslaw was a computer program thing that basically had developed a software called Promise. And Promise is really the foundation of what surveillance would become. And there was a lot of back and forth between some misdealings with the Department of Defense and Justice Department and this private company Inslaw, and a lot of people getting paid. But essentially, this man, Michael Risconsuto, I can't remember.
That's the weird cat,
that
too.
Dude, and I'll get into that in a second, claimed that he was hired to create these backdoors into the software so that our government could spy on not only our enemies who had purchased it, but also our allies. Yeah. At the time, because my dad watched this too, and we talked about it. He's like, man, software, because he worked for IBM in the 80s. And he's like, software, like, yeah, it was cutting edge, but like, it's not like it is now. And he goes, so a lot of the stuff that they were worried about, I don't even think they possibly could do at that time. And I said, but here's where you're wrong. The government wasn't thinking about what was happening right then and there. They knew that the technology could only do so much, but what they were doing was building upon a foundation of what they wanted to do going forward. So at that point, no, they couldn't pick your face out in a crowd of 1 million within 2 seconds. But now they can. All that stuff was the foundation of how that was built when this stuff was going on. So now to this Michael character, which actually, you know what? It's time for a break. We'll come back and talk about this
before we get into Michael. The whole segment.
That whole segment's going to be devoted to this dude. We'll get to that next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio. Dark Side of the Stream, episode 177, American Conspiracy, The Octopus Murders. So first, Danny meets this dude who basically claims that he was hired to create these backdoors into this computer software that was then sold to our allies
Sounds
and
believable.
enemies.
Sounds believable for sure.
The thing about this guy, and I'll go back to the Unsolved Mysteries episode, which they featured him because he was in prison whenever those got shot in the 80s. I didn't believe him because they showed this dude in the Unsolved Mysteries episode, and they didn't give him all because they couldn't devote, like they could have legitimately done like 4 episodes of Unsolved Mysteries just for this case, but there's so many things about it. I think Robert Stack was like, we're not getting into all that. Anyway, so they show this guy. I remember seeing him and being like, oh, this dude wrote computer software? Really? Well, then in the documentary, you get some background behind this guy, and he was actually a genius.
Yes.
He was an engineer. He could build things. He was also a chemist. He was also cooking copious amounts of LSD.
These guys are weird guys, you know. These guys are weird guys, but they've got skills.
They had skills. Now, where I think he was involved, there were certain things that he talked about that I think were true. And there were certain things that he didn't talk about that probably weren't true.
Right.
I think that in regards to him and the other murder that took place, that his best friend this was messed up, dude. To hog tie someone and then put it around their neck so that if once they stop being able to hold their legs up, they choke themselves out. Yeah. That's horrific. That stuff was messed up.
Pretty gangster.
So that dude was in charge of the money and the offshore accounts, and then Michael was in charge of making the drugs and all that stuff. And they claimed that some of that money went to fund some of the CIA issues that were happening in South America and the Middle East during the 80s. And it's no surprise that there were a lot of drugs being sold in this country that funded that stuff.
That was a conspiracy theory until it turned out to be true.
Yeah, and again, it tracks.
One of the many.
So, you know, that whole part of it, do I think that guy was involved? And then that other dude that was involved with the casino, the Native American reservation, that was also part of this thing. So I think it's like, did the government... So as the investigator is looking at all this, he's like, oh, this is just a smaller piece of a bigger thing. But that's the genius part about this whole thing is, they got their hands in everything, but it's such a small little taste of so much that how do you really trail it back? There's intermediate.
Why they do this.
There's all these intermediator guys like the 2 dudes that were involved in the reservation shenanigans.
Right.
Like those are the go-betweens.
And you get so many little bits and pieces, little puzzle pieces. It's hard to put it all together. And then also you get these wild characters that nobody's going to believe. Like you didn't believe that guy wrote, because people are going to write him off. Well, this dude's crazy.
But then some of that stuff tracks out.
It's planned out that way it can't be traced because people are going to go, oh, that guy's crazy. Forget what he says.
Yeah. Well,
when literally that guy's telling you what's going on.
I mean, ultimately the story either cost the life of a journalist because he just lost it or he was killed because he got too deep.
Got too deep and too close to the story.
Years later, along comes a kid who wants to figure out and spends 10 years of his life where this whole documentary comes to fruition trying to figure it out. And that was a trip seeing him young until where he ended up 10 years. He aged. But we'll talk about him and some of the other characters in this Octopus thing next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Mike, the intern, Jay Stevens, still trying to figure out where those balloons came from. It's Dark Side of the Stream episode.
Trying to make them happen again. I did something that made them happen.
I don't know what he did. I don't know.
Woo-hoo.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you did. Either way, we are discussing American Conspiracy, the Octopus murders. So we talked about Michael. Now we got to talk about that Robert Scott Booth character, who was also kind of like, it looked like a go-between for the CIA and then some of these nefarious characters. He ended up talking with Danny about that stuff. And then ultimately that led him to go possibly meet someone that was in the IRS that was also involved in this whole thing. That's where he goes out to Virginia to meet him. According to the police investigation and all the witnesses that were known, he would go wait at these places and no one would ever meet him, right? Well, the guy making this documentary finally, after 10 years, gets his Freedom of Information Act approved.
Yes.
And he gets all the crime scene investigation stuff from the police department in that town where this guy died. And inside of it, there was a witness testimony of a person that was in a room right across from this guy, Danny Casallero's room, who had a very, very, very good description of a man with dark hair, because Danny was blonde, almost to the point of like white hair. A man with dark hair, short hair, by the way. Also, Danny had long hair. So short hair, dark brunette dude entering that room and had a key. And up until the fact that this dude opened that box of evidence, I had never heard that part of the story. Well, the reason that gets brought up is because there was witness testimony talking about, or according to Danny's girlfriend, who was at a bar with him, they were out at drinking one night, and this dude, who I guess was, I don't know if he was wearing his fatigues or any of his naval stuff, but he's obviously in the military, starts talking to Danny and his girlfriend, and they start talking about the stuff that Danny's investigating. This guy knows all about it. Yep. And it's like almost too much, right? And starts talking about this stuff, and they think that this guy may have been the one that did it. But there was no further investigation on him. So that part of it was definitely creepy and weird. And ultimately, you know, I don't think we'll ever know. Just like Michael's friend that, you know, was hogtied, that I think sometimes these things happen, and there's just so much power behind what these guys are able to do.
Just like the guy from Boeing that just got killed a week ago.
I mean, it's just like I said, it's just not front facing anymore. They've been this stuff's been done behind the shadows, and you know, when there's big money to be made and things that happen like this, unfortunately, lie.
Yeah,
and
it's insane.
There's the two theories that you've got this guy who either had sunk all of his money into uncovering this story. He had all this debt that he was about to pay. I think either he went to West Virginia and finally figured out, or it sunk in that, yes, in fact, he'd wasted all his money believing this Michael guy and all these characters that were just stringing him along, and he lost it. That's option one. Or option two is this dude that he met at the bar had something to do with his demise, because unfortunately he ended up getting too close to the truth. That Booth guy, when they were doing his disposition before he was pissed off that they were making him do all these things, because you think at that point he had been protected, but inevitably I think the guard changes in some of those
said he was
guys.
Supposed to be protected.
Yeah,
right?
But eventually those guards change, and that protection, I'm sure, goes away. So either way, we will come back with our reviews of the Octopus next. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens, back in the studio one more time. Dark Side of the Stream, episode 177, American Conspiracy, the Octopus Murder. So how many tentacles would you give this documentary?
Too long.
Too long.
This thing was too long. Too complex.
It's there again.
Too many. This possibly. There's
so much convoluted and circumstantial
evidence. Tough one. It was a tough one.
It really is. It is a very, very hard follow.
You'd have to watch it several times and be really into it.
And there's there's so many different like subplots, like the Danny's investigation plot, the actual octopus thing, what this guy as a documentary filmmaker is going through, and his buddy who's also narrating and shooting the thing.
Nope.
I think he could have used a better editor. I agree with that. I think, but it's so hard. I don't know how the hell you do it. How the hell you tell that story?
Well, because it is a very complex and
without doing all that.
Story.
So I don't know, man.
It is what it is.
It is. It
wasn't my cup of tea. That's all.
I would say I'd give it probably 2.5 to 3 tentacles on that. Yeah. So Jay, please save us. Let's do a short one.
we've had a few dumpers and a few dark ones, and let's go lighthearted. There's a free documentary I found on YouTube about the band Kansas. So you'll like this. Pull up what the name is. I Google it, Kansas documentary. It's called something about nowhere, or point of nowhere, or something out of nothing, or
miracles out of nowhere.
Miracles out of nowhere. Yep. Kansas. It's a nice documentary about the band Kansas. I knew nothing about them.
Okay.
I didn't even know they were actually from Kansas. So
there are some crazy stories about this band. You'd think that
there's some great ones.
They were just good old boys in progressive rock, but no, they like to party a little hard.
It's a great, easy watch, fun, and it chronicles their whole path. And they were just as surprised as anybody else they got famous.
They actually played my parents' high school at one of their dances back in the day. So either way, we'll talk about Kansas next week. Dark Side of the Stream, episode 178. You can download these as a podcast for free on our 104.7 The Cave app. Watch us do it live on Facebook or YouTube every Thursday at 9 a.m. You can also listen to it during my show at that time or Jay's show at 6 p.m. I am Mike the Intern. That's Jay Stevens, and we remind you we watch movies,
documentaries, so you don't have to. Where's the balloons again?
Dark Side of the Stream on
Yay.
104.7 The Cave.
I don't know how the balloons came.